Welcome to another episode of Come Together. Welcome back to, ladies and gentlemen, another episode of Come Together. This is another solo episode, and I'm very excited to finally have integrated some kind of intro, outro to the podcast. I've been kind of heading towards there for a little while, and I guess I needed a little bit of a push. And after my last episode with Deanna, Cosmic D, I'm drinking the worst tasting coffee I've ever had in my entire life right now. It's it's an espresso, whiskey flavored double espresso, and it's horrendous. I bought this years ago, and I didn't want to commit to a full coffee. It's 2:15 in the afternoon. I didn't want to commit to a full coffee, and this was the only espresso slash double espresso that I had left. I tried to cut it with maple syrup, and it's just horrible. So yes, sorry for that side note, but yeah. So I could use the caffeine. So I did my last episode with D, Cosmic D, Deanna, who was such a pleasure, so much fun, out of the box, exactly what it is that I'm looking for. I think that's these kind of conversations is what is fun about doing this, and what's really cool and enjoyable about this. And it's also cool to see consistencies in different philosophies around in different cultures around the world, and how, astrology will basically have different symbols and metaphors and has symbolisms to represent different types of traits. And we have that, obviously, philosophically, when it comes to religions, and it comes to different cultures, and it comes to architecture, and when it comes to everything. There's just certain foundations that always seem to keep on popping up, and most of these foundations typically revolve around the human experience, and for humans to develop and to mature, and as both individuals and a collective community. And so it was a ton of fun. We had such a great time, and I hope to have her back, and I hope to meet a lot of cool, fun new people through her. Um, or at least get, now that I'm started down this road, see, I mean, a lot of times you don't know that whole worlds exist until you start getting into those worlds. I think I've talked about this a little bit in the past, but even something, I've always been pretty blown away by that, then these notions that you have, like these big vague concepts and big vague, um, I guess, ideas or groups or collections. So you could say, for example, sports, and how deep the web of sports goes, because it's not just about the actual people playing on the team, but you have the manager, and you have the coach, and you have the team owner, and you have the part-time owners, and then you have the training team, and then you have the marketing team, and then you have the stadiums that they play, or the arenas that they play in, and who's managing those, and how much revenue is brought in through the players, how much revenue is brought in through the people selling, beers and drinks, and team stores and stuff like that. And you could just spend your, and who represents who represents the players, who represents the coaches, who represents the teams, how do contracts get worked out, where does the money come from, where does the money, what about TV rights, what about streaming rights, how does an organization or a franchise gain or lose popularity, and what can be done about that. And so even so you could be, a very casual basketball fan, and there's so much happening in the background that you just have no idea about. But the more you're exposed to it, the more you actually, or at least for me, the more I fall in love with it, with that kind, with whatever it is. because I think that part of what attracts me, and on a more broad level, what attracts people to anything, is to see that there is depth, to see that there's history, to see that they're becoming a part of something, and it's not something that has no basis. Sorry, that's just isolated in of itself, but it's something that's deeply embedded in many different levels throughout the world and society and time and space. And in all kinds of applications. If you want to be, if you want to be, say, for example, again, stick with the basketball metaphor for now, but you could really apply this to anything. You could apply this to criminology. You could apply this to psychedelics. You could apply this to education. You could apply this to religion. You could apply this to astrology. You can apply this to anything you want. Um, but the more that you get into it, the more, not only the more that you get into it, the more you love it, but you can also bring your own spin on things, whatever your individual talent or perspective is. You can bring what you have to the table and blend it with that thing that you have a passion for. So if for example, if I want to be a sports journalist, and I'm going to talk to I'm going to talk to NBA players and NBA trainers and NBA sports doctors and NBA talent managers and recruits and all that. That's my way of blending myself with this whole big world on so many different levels. And if someone like my friend Zach, who's a CPA and accountant, wants to, feels the same way, the same passion about basketball, but the way that he can manifest his relationship to that and actually be a part of it and be like, feel and be a part of that system and be a part of that world might be through the books. And then you just simply get the pleasure and you just get the love of participating, of working, in conjunction with or, directly involved with something that you care about, even though, yeah, even, no matter, and that makes your job more fun, and that makes your job more meaningful and more enjoyable. It makes your life more fulfilling, and that's something that I've been thinking about recently a lot, just because I do sales and it's very difficult for me to do cold calls, but I found that it's been a lot easier for me to do cold calls recently, not cold calls for sales, but cold calls for the podcast and to reach out to people. And I have a couple of exciting guests coming up in the next, actually, I found that unfortunately a little bit, but the bigger, the not bigger, the more established the guest or the more professional the guest, the more planning and homework there is to do. So I have a couple of really fun and cool guests in the pipeline. Hopefully, we're working on, but part of what I love is let's say so for example with this history. So now that I did this episode with Diana, um, I now I'm interested. And she just brought up in the course of our conversation several different people that I could talk to that I would be interested, seven different types of people that I'd be interested in talking to. I'd be interested in talking to teachers. I'd be interested in talking to students. I'd be interested in talking to historians or people that are doing this in a medical application, people that are doing this in a research application, people that are casual about, astrology or alternative medicine, people that are professional, that are more intentional about it. And, I mean, and, and, and it's so much fun to kind of embed myself in all of those different cultures and all those different aspects of this that that actually gives me a lot of energy and a lot of hope for the future of the podcast because as I go along and as I kind of scrape the bottom of the well in terms of my friends and relationships and people I can just pick up and call and say, hey, let's do a podcast together or let's record an episode together. Once now that I'm scraping the bottom of that well, I was getting a little nervous for a little while, how often am I going to be able to consistently put out episodes and how many new guests am I going to be able to get on and will it get stale to have similar, the same guests on? And just this realization made me so excited because there's so many, because societies and different cultures work like a web. And even though we may only be exposed to one part of it, there's so much that's attached here behind the scenes that, if we keep our eyes open and just kind of follow down the path, see where it takes us, then we could be exposed to a lot of cool and interesting new people that do things and that are important for things that you would never have thought of. For example, I was watching the newest episode of Severance recently, and I cannot I cannot say enough good things about that show. I love everything about that show. It's a little creepy. It's a little, it's just the right amount of creepy and tense. It's still clean, as in the sense that it's not gory. It's not too much. It's just unnerving. It's mysterious. It's tense. The directing is just awesome. The cinematography is incredible. The acting is amazing. And I was watching. We were watching the episode, and there was a beautiful shot of ice, uh, a frozen branch covered in ice that looked like it was about to start thawing, and then the lighting like kind of like faded into this image, and it kind of just showed it for a couple of seconds, and it kind of faded out. And maybe it's symbolic, maybe it isn't, maybe it's just a beautiful shot that kind of goes to the aesthetic of the episode and the show. Um, and I was watching it with a couple of friends and cousins and my wife. And as you watch it, I was like, do you think the director put that shot in and chose that shot, or do you think that was up to the cinematographer, the editing team, and whoever? Because I don't know, and because I don't really know how movies are exactly made like that, and then and I realized, for example, that when I was reading a book about, I think it's actually called MCU, about the Marvel Cinematic Universe. When I was reading that book, one of the things that they talked about in the book that I never knew about was that a lot of times, even before Marvel has a movie script, they'll actually start having a CGI house, or a company that does computer graphic imaging, CGI, computer graphic imaging. They'll have them start working on these enormous scenes and these enormous experiences, sequences rather, that before they even have a movie script, right? So like, okay, well we know we're going to have a fight at some point in the movie between Hulk and the aliens, or we know at some point that Thanos' ship is going to come out of the sky and knock over a couple of buildings. So why don't we don't need a script to describe that. Why don't why don't you guys start working on this? And they just outsource the whole thing, and then they get and they get and then Marvel gets the copy or gets the cut of that the CGI, and they decide whether to use it or not. But that wasn't their directing, I don't think, unless it's part of the script. So I think the point of all this is just essentially to say that there's a lot more layers to everything, and the more nuanced and the more curious that we are, the more that we can learn, and the more nuanced and more curious I am, the more diverse my audience, the people that I'll be recording with and speaking with is. It's funny, as I think this started as a podcast, and I wasn't really sure what I was considering it to be, other than just a podcast or whatever, a talk show. But I'm kind of considering this a blend between, I mean, as it's continued, it's a blend between journalism and just talk show, and that's a lot of fun because journalism gives me a direction to head in. Journalism gives me the concept that it gives me, if I need in a conversation, it gives me the space to actually ask pointed questions, try to understand things, get to the bottom of things. And then the talk show is kind of just more getting people's thoughts, hearing people's stories about life, just reflecting on similar interests or similar perspectives, or recent events, stuff like that. And the show is really kind of becoming a blend of the two of them, and it's really really fun. I love, and I guess just the consistency and just keeping it up has kind of encouraged me to has just kind of led to a life of its own. And the podcast is kind of becoming its own thing, and it really feels like I'm just kind of along for the ride at this point. Like I'm making, I'm the one doing the work, but even in a conversation like this, where I'm talking on a solo episode, I didn't have anything that I'm saying planned right now. I have a half a piece of paper that I ripped out of my notebook in a very clumsy manner, and I have a half a piece of paper with a couple of bullet points on it, and I'm 15 minutes or 16 minutes into talking, and I had no idea that I was going to say any of these, anything that's coming out of my mouth right now. So it's truly, truly emergent. It's truly, truly raw, and it's fun to see. Like, it's fun to see how what it becomes. And I actually think that that's probably the healthiest way for, if I have the time and the resources and the discipline to keep it up. That's probably the best way to go about this, because I think there are certain podcasts that or certain shows or certain um, you know, pieces, news sources, I guess, or collections of information where they feel forced when they start off with having a particular agenda, and they kind of have to stay in that box the whole time. It's actually fun because Andrew Huberman on Huberman Lab has really been the last like 6 months to a year, I would say, has really been branching out. And I know that I'm sure that I believe that a lot because I've heard it just from my friends and people that I've spoken to and that I've read online, that people feel like he was too technical for a long time, that his podcasts were too long and too long-winded and too technical and too thick for most people to understand. And certainly it's definitely true. I mean, when I started listening to him about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, I guess, a year and a half ago, I I used to have to sit with a notebook and take notes on what he was saying, and I really considered his podcast more of like a class that I'm choosing to take in my free time, and I have to study and like keep track and take notes on in order to be able to understand what's going on. And as and some of his episodes are still like that, and I think it's good that he doesn't compromise uh, on the level of discipline, intensity, and depth that he feels like he should be in, or has to, that he feels is his own, that is Andrew Huberman's own and up to his standards, but also that he's responding to the audience in the sense he's getting a diverse, he's getting psychologists, he's getting people that give you advice on how to live life, on relationships, on navigating challenges and stuff like that. These are all things that a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, you weren't seeing very much of at all. And now he just implemented his half an hour once a week episodes of basically just very boiled down, substantive, but shorter versions of what he calls essentials. And so you have a podcast that it started off as something rigid. I want to take the information that I know, and I want to take the science and the rule and the ways to live a healthy, better life, and make it cost free and available to everyone. And that was his original idea. And then, uh, and then he had feedback, and then the feedback, and I believe that it was feedback. I don't know this 100%, but he seems considerate. He's articulated similar sentiments, that he wants to be open to feedback and work on it and work in the podcast and read comments and see what people think, hear who they want him to talk to, and hear the type of content that he's putting out. And he's kind of allowed it to kind of morph into its own podcast. And now it's better. Now it's way better, because now his podcast has the feeling of having like a life of its own, and it's got its own personality, and it's got its own flair, and it's got its own collection of guests that are coming together because all the simple rules that he was implementing in terms of physical health and mental health, of course, as well. You can I mean, they're deeply intertwined, but for I mean, when you have these simple rules like get sunlight in the morning, and do X, Y, and Z in terms of diet, and do X, Y, and Z in terms of stretching, and do X, Y, and Z in terms of training or cold exposure or whatever it is, and very tangible, easy to understand, easy to follow rules that are simple to implement. He's doing the same thing now, but on like a whole, like on a holistic level for all beings. I mean, he's talking about psychedelic therapies, and he's talking about mental health, and he's talking about the science of cynicism, and he's talking about the science of hope and relationships and parenting, and all of a sudden you're kind of getting these same protocols, as he calls them, but for everything. And I think it's wonderful. So that was an extremely long way of saying that I'm very excited about the fact that I do have a new intro outro, that I did play myself on the guitar. So please be kind about it. um, I'll tell you a secret. They're not hard to play at all. The intro is E major going to A major going back to E major, and then the outro is literally just a G chord with a little bit of finger pecking in the G chord to kind of add a little bit more to kind of change up the tone a little bit. But there you go. So step one of the podcast was consistency, which we got down. Step two is expand out to guests beyond my immediate circle. That's being done. Check. And step three, hopefully, is going to be intro outros. And maybe soon we'll get more viewers and switch to video. We'll see. But when I say soon, that could be, I mean, this has taken 6 to 9 months. This is taking about, 9 months for me to get to this point now. So um, we're not going to rush anything. We're going to feel things out. We're going to be organic. Oh, and I'm sorry, I have to give credit where credit's due. That D is the one, your Deanna was the one that messaged me after our podcast when I sent it to her, posted it, sent it to her. Thank you so much for doing this. And she said, by the way, I was listening back a little bit, and I got, and I think that no offense, and take this the wrong way. I think that you need, you can use an intro, outro, and maybe a short clip describing, who you're talking to, what kind of vibes it is. I don't like the introductory clip. I like the idea of just kind of having you toss into a conversation and toss into the show. And and I specifically give a caption as to who the individual is and what it is they do on the episode. And so if it's anything that you're like, oh, cool, I'm wondering what a lawyer would be talking to him about, or I'm wondering what a small business owner would be talking to him about, or I wonder what a brewer is going to be talking about, then you can listen and you jump right in, and it's authentic. And also the second thing that I like to, and also uh, just in terms of conversation, because people have been telling me or asking me, even since I've started the podcast. So for like 85 episodes, they've been telling me, well, maybe you should just like at the beginning of the conversation have an introduction. I don't like doing that. It's not my style because it doesn't feel less. It feels less genuine. It feels less authentic. And B, if the person I'm recording with is not used to being on air or recording or doing podcasts, it's actually easier for us to start a conversation, start recording, and then keep the flow of the conversation that we started having already, so that the person is already kind of, I mean, I guess you could kind of compare this, even though I don't drive stick, but to driving stick, where you could where you start off in first gear until you get to 5, 6, 7 miles an hour, and then once the car's kind of already grooving, then you go to second and third, and you really pick up. So what I did with Dee was, she and I were talking, and we started recording, and then at the end of our already fluid conversation, where she already felt comfortable and you could see that she was more relaxed. Um, at least that was my intuition, or what I was able to sense from her body language. Then I was able to say, okay, now tell me about yourself, tell me about where you're from, tell me about all this. So, and I'm actually a little disappointed in myself, because as a journalist, as an interviewer, or as a conversationalist, there was a lot that we didn't get to talk about that I'm definitely going to have her back on again. We will talk about, but I didn't even get to like talk about what ayahuasca was like. Like, I mean, that's what got me to start talking to her, was that I heard her talk about it at an open mic that I was at the other week, and and I went up to her, and she mentioned ayahuasca, and I went up to her and I was like, I would love to hear about it, and we ended up talking about like everything but that, or a lot but that. So we'll get back there. We'll get back to her. I texted her the second, as soon as she left. I'm like, I can't believe it, but I forgot so many things I wanted to talk to you about. So, including the ayahuasca thing. So we will be definitely recording again, and it's going to be great. Um, in that theme of meeting Dee at the open mic, the reason I keep on hesitating around her name is because when I met her, she was I think she was Cosmic D. Diana, and Cosmic D was her podcast name and her title, her handle on Instagram, and then I kind of just went with that. And then while I introduced her to my wife and friends who were here, while she came to do the podcast, I said, "This D," and she's like, "Yeah, nice to meet you, Deanna." So maybe she's just being, I don't know which she prefers, but um, one of the things something that I was really thinking a lot about recently, and I was actually talking to a couple of people about, friends and family about, was how cool of a time it is that we're in today. And and I know that the world kind of seems like it's upside down. Some people think it's amazing. Some people think it's terrible. Some people don't really know, and they're just too busy working and and just trying to live their lives. And I totally get that, because if I'm not super conscious to do these podcasts, and I'm not super disciplined, and I'm not driven about this, I would have a very difficult time finding the time to do this, because everyday life is everyday life, and it's complicated enough that you could spend you could spend as many waking hours as you could possibly have the stamina to, um, just by keeping up with things that you need to keep up with. Like, whether it's taking care of, if you just want to be a healthy, responsible individual, and you want to exercise, and you want to work, and you want mental or emotional growth or stimulation, you dedicate a little bit of time to that. Dedicate some time, if you feel like it's important to have a clean home, or some kind of, any kind of, relationship with the people around you, whether it's your community or your spouse, friends, or kids or siblings or parents. All of a sudden, like, it's very difficult to do everything every day, you know, and so there's a lot of people in the world that I don't even know. I wouldn't even know what percentage to even think. I wouldn't even know like a number to even throw out there. I have no idea. But I know there's a lot of people that just are trying to, I've done my best to live the right way. I go to work every morning. I get up every morning and go to work each day. It's a Springsteen line from the song "The Promised Land." And your eyes go blind and your blood runs cold. Sometimes I feel so weak, I just want to explode and tear this whole town apart. Take a knife and cut this pain from my heart. And you're like, whoa. And then you realize that there's a reason why Springsteen is an American hero, and there's a reason, and one of the reasons he's an American hero is because he does not ignore the challenges that everyday people experience, that majority of the world experiences, and he puts hope and feeling and poetry and music to the sensations that they're experiencing. And 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 and, and, and that helps us cope. It helps everyday people cope. It helps people that are so tired, and their dreams, and just to keep up, just to keep up takes all their effort, and then their dreams just seem to be slipping further and further from their reach. And what are you going to do, and how are you going to do it? And yeah, and he gave hope to those people. He said, I hear you, I speak to you, I'm one of you, I come from you. um he's not one of us anymore, but he was, and his heart is still here. Um, and and so, and it's funny because I was talking, yeah, even while I was talking to Dee, we were talking about the nostalgia, how I'm nostalgic for a time period that I never lived through. I'm nostalgic for the hippie movement. I'm nostalgic for peace and love and music. I'm nostalgic for, a world that everyone was kind of free to be themselves and pursue themselves. Of course, it wasn't that romantic and it wasn't that way. And I was thinking about this while I was watching the Bob Dylan movie, Complete Unknown, and yes, and you see, Dylan walking through. Now, I've read different accounts of both from Dylan and of other people writing about him, people that knew him, especially from his earlier days in New York and his younger days in New York, and when he was first just hanging out and got there on the scene. And it wasn't romantic, and it wasn't fun, and it wasn't good. I mean, yeah, sure, there were bright spots and bright times, but no money and no food, and having to crash at people's houses and not knowing where your next paycheck's going to be. And then you go and you're going to play and you go at night to try to get a 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning slot at some kind of bar or club or restaurant. And maybe someone hears you, maybe someone doesn't. Majority of the time, the place is empty. I mean, I'm thinking, and I'm really, and then you have some kind of recording from it. And then now, 60, 70 years later, we're looking back on these recordings and we're like, wow, this is gold. Wow, what I would give to be here. Wow, this is incredible. Early Dylan, look at this bootleg version. This is amazing. And look at this time period and look what New York was like. And all these great talented creatives were here and playing here. And when and one of the traps that I fell into or that I've fallen into when it comes to this kind of nostalgia, this kind of nostalgic memory, is it blinds you or blinds me. I'm blinded from the potential of now and the greatness of now and the fun of now and the communities of now because I'm so thinking about I wonder what things would have been like if I was traveling around with the Grateful Dead. I wonder what things would have been like if I was living in New York on the Lower East Side with Dylan and Van Morrison and Springsteen and when all the poets and all the writers were going through town and hanging out there and as far and I'm forgetting that as far as I know and as far as I'm concerned about the open mic that I go to at my mama's in Miami could very well be the same thing. I mean, this could be the route for myself or the route or of other people. There's a guy that is extremely talented. He's a cover player, for the most part, as far as I know. His name is Tim LaRoque, and and I met him about a year and change ago, and he started by playing open mic. I mean, he plays open mics, but then he started making his way through the little the beach bar circuit. And then he started making his way to a little bit bigger venues. And I saw that he went to Crazy Uncle Mike's, which is a pretty legitimate place at this point. Like it's pretty legitimate bands, they're smaller bands, but from all over. I mean, bands will travel from other states, from out of state or throughout the state of Florida to come here. And this kid's already doing it. And I'm like, I know this guy from open mic. We hung out, we talked about Jim Croce, we talked about James Taylor, we talked about Van Morrison and and we had a similar taste in music. And I thought he was so talented, and I thought he was so impressive. And I'm like, wait a minute, but like that's exactly what I said I wish I was living through. And so it's just funny to it's funny because I feel like my initial reaction when I read a story about the dead, or I read a story about Springsteen, I read a story about any creative really, and any artist, any writer, any poet, and I'm like, wow, I wonder what that was like. I wish I had something like that. Like I do have stuff like that. I do have stuff like that all the time, and that so and it's really really interesting because right now as of February 2025, we're at um we're at a really, really, really interesting point in history. And that is that we kind of have the combination of overall, I would say, wealth and comfort and and ability and means, and then everything got turned upside down. Everything first got turned upside down by postmodernism, and then it got turned upside down by wokeism. And then a lot of cracks and a lot of breaks started happening in the world, in culture, in society. And a lot fell away. And then what is left is kind of just like primarily truths, right? And it's almost like the equivalent of, and I forgot who I was talking to about this, but going through a hard time, I think it was my students. When you go through a hard time, nothing makes you grow up and nothing makes you become more mature than going through a hard time. Because a lot of the crap that you pull when you're immature, a lot of the crap that you pull when you're dependent and you're not independent, and you're getting things given to you and you're getting things provided to you, a lot of the worst parts of you fall away when the comforts of life and the comforts of familiarity and the comforts of routine are stripped away. And I think a lot of that has actually happened to us as a society. I mean, certainly as Americans, but also as I think as a planet, as a species. And a lot has fallen away, and it's so interesting because now we're looking at like what's left. And I mean, an enormous topic for a lot of people today is health. And again, I mean, health in food, health in exercise, health in sunlight, mental health, emotional health, physical, spiritual health. Um, all those things were, were kind of ignored. Yeah, you're free to ignore your health when you are being protected. But the second that you're not being protected anymore, the second that you see that you're not being protected, the second it's time to leave home and leave your parents' house, and all of a sudden mom's not making your bed for you, and you don't have, breakfast and dinner ready for you every day, all of a sudden you're going to have to do the work yourself and figure, and then you're going to have to start to strip away what you don't need and realize what you do need, and then what you can build, and what do you really like? What's a real priority for you? And and a lot of these, it's funny because we kind of got into. It almost feels like we're back into a little bit more of like a hippie kind of '60s, early late, '60s world, '60s hippies world, but with a lot more discipline, with leadership that's encouraging a lot of the traits that we're experiencing. I mean, COVID, for example, broke the idea that people had to work in the office. And COVID broke the idea that you have to be in an office space 5 days a week. Maybe you have to be in an office, by the way. Maybe some people really do have to be in an office 5 days a week. But everyone that doesn't have to be in an office 5 days a week, that's been working from home since 2020, they find themselves with opportunities for new hobbies. And like, and I mean, there's a sentiment going around online. I'm not sure really what I think of it, but the basic sentiment was, you can kind of tell who's a disciplined, productive, and responsible person based on how they behaved during COVID, right? During COVID, did you use the time that you had at home to like spend time with your family and get close to your siblings? Did you use your time at home to learn something new, whether it's making bread or pickles or coding or playing an instrument or getting into shape, or did you become an alcoholic during COVID? Or did you become a drug abuser during COVID? Did you lose God? Did you find God? Did you forget about God, meaning, relationships, value, community, like what did you find? What did you not find? And then all of a sudden we kind of pop out of COVID, gasping for breath, wondering what's going on. What did we just live through? Is this real? Is this not? How much of this is manufactured? How much it wasn't? Who can we trust? Who can't we trust? And then you look around, you're like, but I'm kind of still working from home. And I kind of still have more flexibility than I ever had before. And like my parents never had this flexibility, and my grandparents never had this kind of flexibility. And now that I have this opportunity, what am I going to do? And all of a sudden, we have the opportunity now to we're in a position where we could be responsible and pursue ourselves and be fun and be creative and be disciplined about seriously building something up. My cousin does a job that 5 years ago would never have allowed him to work from home. And now he's been staying by me the last couple of weeks, and working from my backyard and working from the kitchen. And yeah, he might have to be by the computer, but he has more flexibility and freedom. And people would never leave their towns where their job were. I mean, like you'd graduate college, and even me, I think I was probably one of the last generations of people to do this. But one of my, I was, but lots of my friends moved places based on their jobs, and so they'd get a job offer from Boeing in Washington or Starbucks in Seattle or at a hedge fund in New York or at a real estate company in Miami or an insurance company in Iowa. And they would have to say, okay, well, got to get up. I got to move my life. I got to head over here. And even though I always wanted to live or I never wanted to live, wherever it is, Hollywood or Iowa or the Carolinas, even though I always wanted to, I never wanted to live there. Now I have the opportunity, I know I have to because of my job. That doesn't exist for a lot of people right now. And so we're kind of been and even more so recently, especially with kind of the breakdown of authority figures in politics and authority figures in society. People don't trust universities as much as they used to. People don't trust doctors as much as they used to. People don't trust pharmaceutical companies as much as they used to. And some people do and some people don't. And of course, I don't think it's really good to go, like everyone that's on any extreme obviously is missing something, and the answer is almost never there is no nuance. It's just bad or just good, right? That answer is almost never that. But um, but because there's a breakdown in trust, it breakdown in trust leads to more independent thinking and independent actions and independent communities, and leads to competition. And I think that all this stuff. So I think the combination of encouragement of creativity because you don't trust institutions and people that we thought we could trust, and the fact that work is not really remote anymore. Sorry, is primarily remote, does not usually require that you be in person the same way as you did even 5 years ago. And so you have more flexibility to pursue communities and places to live that you really want, and different lives and different side businesses and I mean, and also, I mean, in the same theme as being somewhere, embodiment is not as important. Businesses have kind of just started popping up all over online. And instead of everyone having a mom and pop shop, everyone has a mom and pop startup. Everyone has a mom and pop podcast. Everyone has a mom and pop social media account, YouTube account. They write, they ghostwrite, independent journalism, Etsy shops, eBay selling, drop shipping, all these businesses, all these independent small companies, and these that exist now on the internet, that are not limited to the fact that you have to be in Manhattan because otherwise you won't get any foot traffic. Now you get web traffic, and now it doesn't matter where you are in person, but if you get people to come to your website, if you get people to come listen to your podcast, if you get people to come check out your online store instead of your in-person store, then then you can really, really do very well for yourself and live the life that you want. And the more that I think that these ideas are being pushed out there, and the more that these ideas are talked about, I hope that we're going to see an increase in the amount that people actually take advantage of this. And I hope that we see that there's going to be a revival. And it's funny because, you know, I'm kind of happy with my relationship to, say, going to hear bands, right? Because I don't know how I don't know how into, let's say going to see the Grateful Dead in the 1970s I would have been. And if I was really into it, I don't know that how I would have been able to balance the lifestyle of being into it and being responsible and mature and clean and having a family and growing and all that kind of stuff. I don't know how I would have been able to handle that. But now that they did exist and you have bands playing, all the time that are similar to them, it gives me and all of these other people that are fans, whether they're old or young, whether they've been to Grateful Dead shows or just heard about it from their parents or their grandparents or their friends, it gives them the opportunity to kind of participate still in that culture, in that family, but in a much more balanced way. So even though I find myself being nostalgic for time periods that I wasn't born in or part of, I think that I should be putting more emphasis and be more conscious of and intentional about the fact that in many, many ways, this is actually better. In many, many ways, and obviously, I do believe that I was born into the time that I was born, to the people, the family that I was born into, the people that I was born into, the communities that I was born into. I believe that all this happens for a reason. And I believe that I wasn't born in the 60s, 70s, or 50s for that reason. I believe that maybe I wouldn't have been able to be so balanced, and maybe I could be more nuanced now, and maybe now and now I am more prepared to be mature and conscientious and intentional about it. So so now I have to just make the most of it and kind of draw inspiration from that point, that time period, but really look around where I am now and just say, I love this. And I think that the one thing that we really have to work on, I guess, almost as a society and a culture, still is returning to embodied um, hangouts and experiences. That I don't think that we have completely recovered quite yet from the social fragmentation that occurred during COVID, because it was so intense and it was so scary and it was considered so dangerous, and it just stopped on every level. It stopped on a religious level, it stopped in a corporate level, it stopped in a business level, it stopped in a social level, it stopped in every kind of capacity. People, like community, just embodied community, people together just stopped. And I think that's actually for the worse, far worse. And even though we've made ourselves more flexible than ever, especially again with the fact that real estate doesn't mean what real estate used to anymore. The fact that that degrees don't mean the same thing they used to anymore. The fact that that a job doesn't mean the same thing as what a job meant 10, 15, 20 years ago, certainly not 50 years ago. The fact that all this is different should actually just be providing us with more space to hang out more, to create little communities and little play and thoughtful groups of creatives and and groups of people that like art and like history, like whatever it is that you're interested in, to create social groups and circles, return to embodied experiences. And I think that mentally and socially, our recovery is not complete as a nation, certainly from COVID, but definitely from postmodernism, COVID, and woke, and the woke era. Um, I think that we're not going to be completely out of the danger zone until we actually return to the roots of being social creatures. And I do also think that, and I mean, there's a million examples of how this manifests and how this is applied, but we tend to be better as smaller groups of people rather than enormous groups of people. Um, whether it be that a band prefers to play in a small ballroom as opposed to a stadium, whether it be that if you have a synagogue that's got 25 people as part of the community or 150 or 250 people, look at how close people feel to one another, see what people are willing to do to step up or sacrifice for the community, to help other people in the community. As we kind of become larger entities, we care about one another less. And I mean, that's an observation. It's not, I'm not saying this to be a fact, and I'm happy to talk about that if you disagree. But that's just my thoughts on that. And I really, so I think that we actually do need to return to these kind of smaller community, these smaller social communities where you can have a whiskey club, you can have open mic at a brewery, you can have library meetups, you can have dads and moms and kids gather together at different points out the week for to kind of just let loose together and to spend time together and to grow from one another because we gain so much from from being together, feeding off other people, hearing feedback to our thoughts and to our behavior. um, and I mean, everyone already knows this, but the way that we interact with one another online is just absolutely horrendous. And and because of that, and we treat people online in a totally different way than we'd ever treat anyone, confront anyone in person. If have the people talk to other people the way that people respond to each other on YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, um, our world would not, our society would not last very long before collapsing. And we don't do that in person because it is admittedly crazy. It's literally a crazy way to behave. And I think that the return to embodied smaller gatherings is going to be an integral part of healing, and maybe that's something that could help encourage. Maybe that's something that could help do. Whether it's my mamas, whether it's the breweries, the small craft breweries that I'm a big fan of, whether it's local shops that I like to go visit, or malls, or I mean, people don't go to the mall anymore just to walk around, as far as I know. Um, I don't know. I think that we have a lot of really wonderful things coming up, and and we're living in a really, really special time. And I'm very excited for the future. I'm very excited for the present. And that will be it for now because I have to go teach. But hopefully another episode or two coming out this week. And I promise I will keep on working on providing fun, entertaining, thought provoking, and thoughtful guests. So bye for now, everyone. Take care.